If you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do. All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Hello, and welcome to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci.
And I am your co-host, Sarah.
And today we are talking about appreciativeness.
Oh.
Is that a word?
Sure.
I'm going to go that it is and appreciate that fact.
Appreciativeness.
So, yes.
I mean, it could be. I'll look it up.
Being appreciative. Appreciative.
Appreciative. Now, that's not a word.
No, it's not. Being appreciative and how that helps in your life rather than sort of focusing on what you don't have, focusing on what you do have. Mm-hmm. And being thankful for it and being grateful for it and appreciating it even if it's not necessarily the ideal.
You know, a lot of people do this during the month of November, where they do like
for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, Thanksgiving. They do a month of thankfulness like on social media, and they try to post one or two or whatever every day things that they are grateful for or appreciative of, which is, you know, nicer than sometimes when you're on social media and people are just complaining about everything.
Well, this is like the Christmas in July version of that, since we're about half a year away from Thanksgiving.
It's May 1st.
Thanksgiving in May. Christmas in July and Thanksgiving in May.
It won't be May 1st when you hear this episode. It's May 1st when we're recording this episode.
Correct. So this is something I definitely have a hard time with because I'm going to say pessimist, although normally it just feels more of like realist who wants to be very, very prepared.
But it can be, I don't know. I don't know if it's the society we live in, but it can be so much easier to just focus on the negative. And it's easier to kind of wallow in that negativity and then have friends sort of wallow with you, you know? I mean, it's not always easy. And especially when things feel like nothing is going well or right, it can be hard to find the positives in that. So, yeah.
Well, and I think it's also we put more weight towards the negatives and towards the things we don't have than the things we do have. So you can have like a really great day at work, but then if someone cuts you off, you get home and you're in a bad mood. It's like, but the rest of your day was actually really great. But that one terrible thing is like you just get stuck thinking, oh, that jerk.
Yes.
That idiot.
Ugh.
And it keeps going over and over in your mind. And we just sort of discount the good things. They don't measure up as much, I guess. And we really focus so much more on the negative side.
We do. And appreciativeness is a word, according to the internet, which
so
never would lie to me.
No, it wouldn't. It would never do that.
Although it does come up on online dictionaries, which makes me think that it is a real word.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's also very interesting. It's hard for us to appreciate not only the good things, but even just what we have in general, because we're always thinking about what we don't have.
Yes.
So it's like, and I did this once and my friend completely pointed out how ridiculous this was. I bought a app on the App Store. I cannot remember what it was now, but it was something I really, really wanted. So I was willing to pay the like $8 or whatever it was, $8, I can't remember, for this app. And then about like 3 weeks later, the app was on sale for 50% off. and so instead of being $8, it was $4, or instead of being $4, it was $2. I cannot remember. It was whichever it was. And it's like, I'm sorry, you're upset about $4 or $2. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, when you think of it that way.
There are people that, you know, don't have shoes or homes or, you know, I mean, any number of things you could throw in there.
But it's like, I missed the good deal and they got my money when they didn't necessarily have to, even though that $4 does not do anything and my coffee costs more than that. But yeah. They've actually done research on this. It's often called the paradox of choice, which is, and I've seen this talked about different things where they offer people either colored pens or they offer people different types of jams, and found that when people had more options, they were actually less likely to choose anything.
Oh, interesting.
So if you offered them 3 types of jams to choose from, they were more likely to buy than if you offered them 12 types of jam, which sounds sort of counterintuitive because you're thinking, wouldn't the 12 types be more likely to actually have people buy because you're more likely to hit whichever type they like? Mm-hmm. But because they've got so many choices, there's this sort of like, I guess, fear going on in the back of their mind of, well, if I buy this one, maybe that one's actually better. Or if I buy this one, I don't have that one, and maybe that was the one I really should have gotten. And it's like, I don't know which one I should choose, so I won't choose at all.
FOMO.
Yes, definitely FOMO. Mm-hmm. I'm a big... FOMO is definitely something I have to work on.
Which, for those of you who are wondering what we're talking about, FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Right. Yeah. And it originally was sort of like, and I think Mindy Kaling did this in one of her memoirs, which was titled, like, Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me? Yes. It's sort of like, everyone's together and I'm not there for the cool party or whatever. Yeah. But it can also be sort of, just for even options of, and I've done this a lot where it's just like, I like this shirt and there's a purple one and there's a gray one, but I really don't need 2 of the same shirt. Right. So I should only pick one. I'm going to make myself pick one for my wallet, and then when I get home, I'm like, man, maybe I should have gone with the other.
Yeah, that would go so well with this XYZ pair of pants, skirt, whatever it is. Yeah, right. I know. We can always find reasons why we should have gotten the other.
Right. And it's sort of that whole like grass is always green on the other side sort of thing. It's like, because you don't have it there with you, it's much greater in your head than it actually is in reality. And then if you had actually gone back in time and picked the other one, you would still go home and be like, man, maybe I should have picked the gray one or whatever. Right, like it's kind of really hard to win at this. There's almost no way to win. It's a rigged game.
Well, and going back to the society we live in currently, social media, I think, probably plays a large part in this, because there is that whole perfect Pinterest kind of mentality where, people only post their best pictures on Facebook or social media or Pinterest, where there's just these beautifully laid out, whatever it is, table arrangements, baby showers, I don't even know. And so you get this unrealistic idea of what you should have. And we're going to use that S word that we're not supposed to use. But, oh my gosh, all these people over here are having so much more fun than I am. Yes. And I actually read a book about this woman. It was a novel, but the woman would only... She didn't want to post things on her Instagram because it wasn't perfect. She wasn't going to these perfect places. And so she would only post, like, she would go somewhere to a fancy place and she would take a picture of somebody else's food because she couldn't actually afford to eat there. So she had this perfect Instagram life. But the book was My Not So Perfect Life by Sophie Kinsella. Her life wasn't perfect, obviously, but she made it seem right. And then her friend who lived in New York, she lived in London. Her friend who lived in New York, turned out she was kind of doing the same thing, and so they had this like rivalry going on.
Edit our lives on social media. I mean, I do that too with my Facebook. I won't post anything unless it seems like really awesome, and it's not me going and taking pictures of other people's foods. Right. But unless it's something that I'm like, you know what, you probably wouldn't have heard about this in my life 95% of the time. I won't post it. It won't even just be like, oh, had a really good class or whatever. I'm like, what's the point of posting that? And like, that's not special. So it's only, for me, it's almost always only just special things. And then it's like, so then it seems like I'm not on Facebook for like months at a time just because I'm not posting anything whatsoever. Right. So yeah. Right. But that, beyond focusing, more on what you have instead of what you don't have, I think it can also help in certain situations to focus more on what you can do. Rather than what you can't do. So if you're in sort of a situation and it's like, gosh, everything sucks and I don't have the money to pay for whatever, that rather than that can really just sort of be a like repetitive cycle of just only thinking about all the not theirs. But that rather focusing on what you can actually affect can be helpful.
Right. And it kind of comes down to, this isn't exactly the same thing, but it's like when you think about trying to make a difference, or make a change, right? And you get so overwhelmed with how crazy the world is that you just stop and you don't do anything. But if you focus on changing one tiny little thing in your corner of the world, you never know where that might lead.
Yeah, I just read this and I cannot remember what the book was, where the guy, there was a storm on a beach or something. And so all these starfish had washed up on the beach and were just lying in the sun dying. And he looked at it and saw, like, you know, this went on for probably a few miles along this beach. And he's just like, man, that's so many starfish. I can't do anything. And he just sort of sat in the sand and was sort of just thinking how depressing this was. And this little girl comes up and starts throwing the starfish back into the ocean, just one by one. And he goes up to the little girl and he's like, there's no point to that. You can't save them all. And she looks at him and picks up a starfish and throws it in the ocean. It's like, well, tell that to that one.
Right. Yeah.
That's like, huh. Yeah. I mean, you can't, there's no way to probably solve all of any sort of life, world, societal problems, any sort of big problem. You cannot fully solve that. But even just doing one thing may not seem like a lot, but could actually be really helpful. Could be life-saving even for, you know, that one person you helped.
You hear stories all the time about, you know, something that you think is insignificant, like you were kind to someone and it wasn't even a big deal to you, but maybe they were having the worst possible day of their life and they were contemplating if their life even mattered. And, you know, that tiny thing that didn't mean anything to you meant so much to them. You never know.
Or the reverse, where you didn't think you were that terrible, but you said something kind of snide and they're already like not having a good day. And that's just like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Oh yeah. Been there. I mean, on both sides of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think for that, one of the things that can help is a sort of trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. And that's probably something we should be doing almost all the time, because it's so very easy to think, oh, this is my world and I see it from my perspective. And so either that's the way it always is for everybody, or that no one else can understand both ways. Yeah. And so that if someone's, you know, being rude to you, it's just because they're a jerk and not necessarily because they're having a bad day or something.
Right. They just found out that any number of things could have happened that could make them be extraordinarily cranky.
Right. But also to try and donate or volunteer, and to have that, you know, even if it's just one person you're helping through that action, that's one person more than it was.
Right.
So we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. Today we're talking about appreciativeness, which is a word, and how to be more appreciative. So one of the tips I saw that I really like, just because it's not something I would normally have ever thought to do, is to take your joy at least as serious as you take your pain.
Oh, yeah. You know, I don't know that we often always do that.
I don't know that I've ever done that. That, you know, if I'm in pain or having a bad day or a bad half a year or what have you, that's something that I'm like, okay, this is kind of affecting my life. And so I can sort of make adjustments for this to deal with this and recognize, you know, I maybe can't do certain things at a certain time. So I'm just going to give myself, you know, the evening or whatever to not have to do any sort of obligation and to just allow myself to feel terrible and get that out of my system and then go on with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yes, wallowing. It's a scheduled wallowing time.
Yes. Do you think it's because it's so much like there are, I don't even know how to phrase this, but you know, like when you can cry, you can rage. There's these specific things. I guess there are the equivalents for expressing joy, but it seems like I don't know. I'm not even sure what I'm trying to phrase here. I'm not sure why we find it easier to express the pain and the bad stuff more than the joy.
Well, I think the joy feels a bit more can do without. But if you're in pain, it's sort of like, I've got to deal with this or it'll affect me. Mm-hmm. So you can't just ignore it. But it's like, oh, if I'm happy, I'm going to, set aside an hour to frolic like I'm Maria and the Sound of Music on the Hills. Like,
that sounds awesome. Let's do that.
But it feels so like I've got 20,000 things to do. I cannot have scheduled frolicking time
right. It sounds
in my day.
Like maybe a little selfish or something. Yeah.
It's completely something you can put aside for later that never comes. So it's like, this is not a need right now. Whereas, for health-wise, most of us do agree that you should at least sort of deal with the negative feelings every now and again and not completely keep them bottled up.
Right.
But I don't even know how you could bottle up joy and happiness unless it was something like you were keeping a secret and we're going to tell people later. But other than that, like, I don't know that I would bottle up my happiness till Saturday or like what?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, do we just express it more naturally? And so you're like, yay! And then you go back about your business, whereas you have to actually schedule that wallowing time. Right. I'm at work. I do not have time to cry for an hour. I will do that tonight when I get home with a tub of Ben & Jerry's.
Or like we mentioned earlier, we don't think about the happy moments as much as we think about and focus on the bad ones. Yeah. So you have to sort of take the time and this is something that's definitely been mentioned a lot in the past decade or two, which is about, sort of being mindful or being in the moment. That to help schedule the joy, to realize even just in the moment how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. And so I read a book recently that talked about this as relishing, as not just being in the moment, but sort of seeing the moment as this really amazing thing, even if it's just like washing the dishes or something.
Oh.
That like sort of setting your attitude to think not only, oh, this isn't so bad, but rather this is really great somehow, which I would struggle with, I think.
Well, it's kind of the word Pollyanna comes to mind. Oh. I mean, and I'm not trying to be snarky, but there is kind of that. Let's find something that this makes us happy about, right. Or she definitely had an optimistic worldview, and then it's become this kind of a verb or an adjective, Pollyanna.
I was about to say, can you Pollyanna a Pollyanna situation?
Maybe we can make it a verb
situation.
Why can't you Pollyanna it? It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's a couple of syllables, maybe too many. But that research has also suggest, again, in the same way, we tend to more notice negative things. You just tend to notice more things, period, when you pay attention to them.
Right.
So, like, for medical things where they're asking people to self-report on like their habits or whatever, if someone has this idea that, like, I'll just completely throw out something random that like brushing your teeth is related to skin cancer. It's not. There's no research that suggests that. But if that was in your head and then you were asked to, notice how many times you brushed your teeth if you had skin cancer, you're going to notice that a lot more when you're thinking about it than you just normally would in your everyday life.
Right. It's like when when for some reason you notice something and then you notice that thing everywhere.
Right.
That could be a word. It could be any number of things, but you'll be like, I'm seeing this everywhere today. Yes. And because you noticed it, that's probably the same kind of theory.
Right. So the idea is to do that with good things. And to notice the good things, and then you start seeing more good things. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, oh, hey, someone held the door for me this morning. And then, oh, look, I found a $20 bill, and just start noticing all the good things. And see the bad things as just sort of, I'm now having this idea of like water repellent fabric and the water drops just sort of hitting it and then running off.
So you should Scotch guard your life.
Yes. Sure. Let's go with that one. I mean, I was thinking waxing because I'm more old-fashioned or something, but sure, Scotch guard. Why not? Scotch guard your life. Or just not let them stick and sort of recognize them and then just sort of let them bounce off. And
water off a duck's back. That's a phrase.
Is it? Is this a Minnesota thing?
I'm not from Minnesota, but yeah, no, it is a phrase. Just let it roll off of you like water off a duck's back.
I've never heard that before, but very helpful. Yes, that's
I'm old, people. That's what's happening here. I'm old.
Well, because the only duck thing I know is about the whole churning feet but looking calm thing.
Oh, right.
And we're not suggesting that because that can be unhealthy. But to definitely try and see to pay more attention when good things do happen and not just be like, oh, that was nice, and moving on, and traffic sucks.
Right.
To take the time to focus on that good thing and not just let it be a fleeting thought, but to really notice it and be in that moment and be mindful, or whatever you want to call it, for the good things and less so for the bad things.
So I'm going to guess that you have some tips to give our lovely listeners about how to do this.
I do, but I will tell you them after the break. So stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. Today we're talking about how to be more appreciative. And so we're going to sort of list a couple of ways you could do that. We've kind of been talking about it, but not specifically. But so one of the ones is, and we were kind of talking about this before the break, is sort of trying to see the silver lining in every situation or be optimistic. And those are not exactly the same thing. Optimists can be optimistic in any situation, but silver lining, I think, can only happen in not so good situations, just because you kind of require clouds to have a silver lining, I think.
Okay, yeah, I can see the logic there.
Meteorologists, let me know. But that, in either case, no matter how bad a situation is, see the good parts of it and not just like that whole joke that happens in like every movie of like, oh, well, at least it's not raining, and then it starts to rain.
No, of course.
Not that sort of, I don't want to say superficial, but that sort of just, oh, anyone could have thought of things. But to see the deeper, not necessarily obvious sort of situations. So that like, if you, for example, lost your job or something, that rather than seeing that, oh, I'm unemployed and this is going to cause a struggle monetarily, see it as a time to sort of reflect and think about yourself and what you actually really want. And did you really like that job, or do you want to try and make a change in your life? And that when things come along, they're not necessarily negative, they're just disguised strangely.
Right.
That sounds like a platitude, but it is.
Well, and that can be really hard. I mean, if you, back to the example of if you lose your job, the first thing that's going to go through your head is something, it might be something along the lines of, oh crap, or something worse that I won't say on the podcast. How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to buy food? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Et cetera, et cetera. That's a natural reaction. But if you can kind of get past that initial panic and look at it a little more rationally, then you can maybe find some things. Maybe there's an opportunity in there.
Right.
And it's not just being blindly optimistic. Yay, I lost my job. Now I can go, join the circus like as I've always wanted to.
Now I don't have to wake up at 6:30.
Exactly. Although that may come out of it. Oh, hey, I can sleep in tomorrow morning and then get up and update my resume. But you don't have to be blindly optimistic. But once you get past that initial panic, there's usually something that you can use to your advantage in most situations.
Yeah, and to sort of change the way you're looking at things and turn the situation to helping you.
Right.
Or like, I remember I saw a show, and I'm completely blanking on what the heck the rest of the show was about, because this is the only thing I remember where they said that it was about relationships, and if you like broke up or were single for a long time, that wasn't just, that because you were unattractive or something, but that rather you were given that time to work on you and figure out what you wanted in a relationship. And that it's not just a fallow period. Although it's kind of a fallow period, because fallow periods are used to put nutrients back in the soil.
There you go. And as someone who was, got married later in life, I can see that from both perspectives. When I was single, I was often thinking, oh man, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to find someone that I don't want to, smother with a pillow. All of those things. What is it about me? But now that I'm married, I can also look back at that time and be like, oh, I really liked X, Y, and Z about being single. And
right.
It's not that I don't like being married, but it's definitely a different way of existing in the world.
Or that like you would not have been prepared to be married, 5 or 7 years before you were.
Right.
That you had to go through life to get to that stage when it's like, okay, now this is a good place to be.
Some people get married young and they make it work. If I'd gotten married like my mother did at 19, God, I was stupid at 19. I mean, I'm just grateful for my imaginary husband who doesn't exist, that we did not get married at 19.
Right.
That man, I actually could have gotten married around 19. Thankfully, I said, no, thank you. I don't want to get married right now.
Right.
And also my name would have been Sarah Lee, and I didn't want to bake for the rest of my life.
I won't go there. But that brings up another good tip, which is sort of gratitude exercises.
Just baking. No.
Well, I don't know how you would do unless you like decorate the cupcakes with things you're grateful for. But
I like it.
Sure, we'll go with that one. Not Sarah Lee, but
hey,
but and there's various different ways you can do gratitude exercises. There are gratitude journals, or you can sort of put up little inspirational sort of post-its around your house or your office or wherever you happen to be a lot of the time. Or one of the ones I liked was a sort of take a picture every day of things you're grateful for. And they don't have to be like super great things. It could just be like a pretty view of a sunset, or
I found socks that match.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything huge. Anything can make you sometimes I joke that I'm easily entertained, or it's the little things, but really it can be those tiny little things where you're like, oh, I found 75 cents in the bottom of my purse. Whatever, if it makes you smile, that's all that counts.
Well, and also if you do this trying not to do sort of repeats, it really does make you notice things more. Because after, the first 10 or so, you're like, well, what else do I write? Like I wrote all of my family members and all my pets and the fact that I have all the big obvious things, and now I have to start figuring out other things I'm grateful for. And then you really do have to sort of look around and notice the small things that you often don't notice.
One example of this that I've seen before is to have a jar, and so instead of like posting those Post-its or whatever, when you notice things, you write them down and then you throw them in the jar. And then on days when you can't think of anything or you feel like crap, you can reach in the jar and pluck something random out, and it might make you smile.
Yes. But then also I think, and we tend to not think of this way because it feels it's definitely harder than sort of seeing the positive, which is just actually acknowledging that life can suck at times. That rather than trying to, fight it all the time and pretend it's not the case, acknowledging that, yes, sometimes life sucks, but that's usually not a permanent situation. That things come into your life and it may be for a short period of time, and it's usually for longer than we'd all appreciate for a period of time, but that almost always you do sort of get back up again. And that's actually, and I tried to explain this, I can't remember if it was to my mother or to a friend, where we were watching Wheel of Fortune and I was trying to explain what the actual Wheel of Fortune was, which is not a game, which is not a wheel with prize money on it. Sorry, that's not what the real Wheel of Fortune is. But that the original Wheel of Fortune was sort of the thought of fate or luck.
Right.
And that if you are specifically on one part of that wheel, let's say you're at, 213 on a clock, wherever that would be, but you cannot move from that position. If that clock rotates like a bicycle wheel, you'll be down, and then you'll be up, and then you'll be down again.
Right.
And that's just how life is. That there are downs, but there are also ups, and that comes to everybody.
Right. Yep. That's true. I mean, sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down.
I mean, the downs seem to last much longer, but...
Well, they always feel like they do.
They do.
Whether they do or not, you know? I mean, because you feel stuck in those parts. And it's so much harder to see... You know, when you're happy, time flies when you're having fun.
Right.
But then when you're not having fun, it just feels like it will never, ever end.
Right. And so that it can be helpful to think of previous situations you've had in your life where things weren't going that great, but you were able to get through it and to overcome it, and to just sort of remind yourself that this is not a permanent situation and this is not where I'll always be, and that I have the means, even though it doesn't feel like it right now, to somehow get through this really sucky situation, and then I'll be up again.
Right.
And to just try and make that up last as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to end with a quote that I really like and try and live my life by Marcus Aurelius, which I cannot remember the Latin for it, and it's not clear that Marcus Aurelius actually even wrote it in Latin, but I won't even try with my non-existent Latin skills, because we don't learn Latin anymore.
Well, I'm offended.
You're offended by my not knowing Latin? I know. I don't know ancient Greek either. I apologize.
I do.
You really know ancient Greek?
I can read ancient Greek, yes.
Wow. I should have brought this in ancient Greek and had you read it. But I don't know it in ancient Greek either. I only know the way it's often translated, which is that the universe is change, but life is what our thoughts make of it. So
it's better not in Latin. I mean, in Latin,
it's
you just be
not
like, I don't
Latin.
even... Well, in Latin, I'd just be like, yeah, okay, I don't know what that means.
I mean, it's a bit like the Hippocratic Oath, which is in Latin, even though Hippocrates was Greek. And I've gotten off topic, but yes, the Marcus Aurelius, and that's from his meditations, and he actually says a good number of things in those meditations if you haven't read them. But just a thought to sort of carry you through life, that things are constantly changing, and the only thing you do actually ever have control over is the way you think about your situation. Mm-hmm. And since that's what you do have control over, you should use that control to the best of your abilities.
Very nice.
So thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.